Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and welcome to another pod shoot. It's been a few weeks. I took some time off to travel. That's why I have I didn't bother shaving while I was away, and still haven't gotten in the mood to shave again. Today I'm here speaking with Norman Mackenzie Richmond. Norman is head of, it's called Ofcom Watch, is that correct?
Yes, that's right, Jeffrey.
Okay. Why don't you explain to people, because I think you're aware of the decision BitChute has made with respect to the UK audience. You won't be speaking with anyone unless they have a VPN from the UK. So assume that you're speaking to a non-UK audience. So why don't you describe a little bit about who Ofcom is, what the Online Services Act, and what precipitated you to, when did you start Ofcom Watch, and what triggered you from making that decision to begin doing Ofcom Watch?
Yeah, sure, Jeffrey. First of all, Ofcom stands for the sort of very Orwellian named Office of Communications, which is a government agency in the UK. And Ofcom was set up originally back in 2003 under the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, to basically regulate TV and radio. And now with the Online Safety Act, Ofcom powers have been really broadened and deepened to embrace all internet, all social media platforms. So it's a real power grab in terms of government seeking to control information, to censor what they don't like. And they've got a government agency able to do that now and enforce their decisions with huge fines, which I could see why BitChute, as well as some other big platforms, decided to withdraw from the UK market, because you could potentially be liable for 10% of your world sort of revenues and 18 million pounds, over $20 million fines, which is just prohibitive. I mean, it's a complete attack on free speech, and that's why we set up.
To clarify, sorry to interrupt you for a second, but to clarify, BitChute did not exit because of the fines. BitChute made a decision based upon principle, not economics.
Sure.
The deterrent for us was no, we were worried about being fined. No, we made a decision that we don't want to participate with what we see as an Orwellian regime. It's not just the issue of the censorship required, but also the type of surveillance that would be required. So we don't want to enable that type of censorship, and we don't want to enable that type of surveillance regime. So we think the only way at BitChute, the only way to speak out with respect to the Online Safety Act and how oppressive a regime we think it is to everybody else should do what BitChute has done, which is BitChute has made the content available for any UK content creator can continue to put content up, only it can't be seen or engaged with or interacted with in the UK. They're not deprived of a voice anywhere else but in the UK. That should be very ironic, but unfortunately, those are the circumstances. So we've not deprived any content creator in the UK from continuing to have a voice. It's the UK that has determined that they don't want that voice heard in the UK. We think if every platform followed what we did, then maybe they would reconsider the Online Safety Act. Unlike many platforms that they will go whining to government and knock on the door of Trump, and say, please include this in the negotiations on a trade agreement with the UK. We believe in the sovereign individual and responsibility. So we're responsible for the decisions that we make. We don't wait. We don't want to rely upon third parties. We don't want to depend upon third parties. We want to behave consistent with our values and principles are. So our decision was made only because of the principles. This was a stand on principle. Ray, the founder of BitChute, has made several strong statements. I think really excellent statements. Basically making an appeal for all platforms to follow our example. And our example is basically everybody should do what BitChute did. Make sure that everyone in the UK can still post content so the whole world can see their content. And if basically there is no social media, quote social media, whatever you want to call it, in the UK, because everybody's shut down in the UK. I don't think then basically once the UK sees the consequence of their actions is to basically shut down, access to all these sites, they'll reconsider what they're doing. So we don't want to, as I said, we at BitChute don't want to rely upon third parties. We don't want to rely upon governments. We want to act consistent with our values and principles, and so we took a stand, and it has nothing to do, with the fines. Maybe other companies decided that they were driven by the fines, but for us, it had nothing to do with the fines. We think this regime is a terrible regime, and we don't want to enable the regime. To cooperate with the regime, you become a collaborator with the regime, and we refuse to be a collaborator. X still collaborates with them. Facebook is still a collaborator. So any platform that's still operating and willing to accept, this type of regime is a collaborator, and they're enabling the regime, and they're encouraging other people to do exactly what UK has done, because they'll see that basically none of the platforms will stand on principle like BitChute has.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that the principle here at stake is free speech itself. I mean, free speech predates being given the democratic vote. If you don't have free speech, all the other rights clearly fall into absolutely irrelevance. And in the UK and across the EU at the moment, free speech is being systematically dismantled, and it's being dismantled by a technocratic state in the UK and in the EU. They are not lovers of free speech, and they even have a phrase for it, Jeffrey. They use the word infodemiology. They believe there's an infodemic, which is basically there's too much information, and that ordinary people need to have what they call trusted sources for information and for content. And surprise, surprise, the people who will decide who the trusted sources are government itself, and that's where we part company with the UK government and with the EU. We think the last people that should be given control of any information, if information is to be controlled at all, the last people you would give that control to would be government. They are the most distrusted amongst peoples of UK and Europe, and they certainly aren't to be trusted with free speech. So I understand BitChute's principled decision to withdraw from the UK market on that basis.
Yes, BitChute began withdrawing from the UK first when BitChute was debanked, and demonetized. So you really can't operate a business if you can't have a bank account. And BitChute had lost its bank account. Nobody would bank BitChute, and nobody didn't bank BitChute because BitChute bounced checks or anything like that. People just took a look at don't like free speech, and they try and bankrupt free speech platforms. So really, it's not significantly different in the U.S. really. In my opinion, U.S. has something called Section 230. Some people claim that Section 230 protected free speech, but no, Section 230 protected content moderation, and gave people immunity from the editorial decisions platforms make. So I'm for abolishing 230. And if platforms decide to, boost engagement or really manipulate through algorithms, deciding to repress certain content and amplify other content or ban content or things like that, then they're basically making the same type of decisions an editor is making, and you can't make a claim that these platforms are really, pure, organic platforms with respect to the user-generated content. If some platform is the timing to amplifying certain users and to repress other users, that's not a user generate. That doesn't mean that the traffic in the platform is determined by the decisions the user make. A lot of the traffic in the platform is driven by the decision the platform makes, through their algorithms that are obscure, and nobody and there's no transparency associated, with the decisions that they make. So basically, all platforms are acting as editors. They have human editors and they have AI editors, but that they have editors, and they're determining, like traditional media, what content people should have exposure to and what content people should not have exposure to. Only the government granted them a special immunity. And why did the government do that? Well, the comments that they made at the creation of 230, the people who were the main authors of it, is they said that if there was not content moderation, there would be the wild, wild west. So the first time, really until the internet came out, we really never had an opportunity of testing anyone's commitment, real commitment, not the words that come out of their mouth that are just bullshit, but really, their real actions. Until the internet came out, we never really had a test of people's real commitment to free speech. Because basically before, if you wanted to be heard, you could write a letter to the editor, you could get on a TV program, but basically to get access to an audience, you had to go through gatekeepers. So when the internet first came out, there are no gatekeepers. So the government did not like that there were no gatekeepers, and the government wanted to delegate responsibility for people to be gatekeepers. And so they gave them the special immunity so they could be gatekeepers, because they don't really want unfettered free speech. So, I mean, that's true globally. People in the US say, oh, yes, 230 protected platforms. No, the common law system already had protected platforms in the US, because there was a case, a CompuServe case, in the beginning of the 90s, I believe, that basically gave immunity to platforms that operated as a bulletin board. In other words, if the platform doesn't do surveillance, if the platform just makes itself available as a host and lets people put content up, then the platform has no responsibility for the content that people put up. The people who have the responsibility are the people who put the content up, and that's the way it should be. That the third party should not be responsible for content that they create, for other people generate, unless you become a partner in that content by amplifying it. Then you become a partner, because it's not a matter of you being neutral and somebody putting it up and they're responsible for getting an audience. You're helping get an audience, and therefore you become a partner, in the creation of that content, because you are taking affirmative actions to either amplify it or suppress it. So you're now involved and engaged in the content, and so that's serving an editorial function. BitChute doesn't do that. So the content is all organic on BitChute, and so I would welcome the sunsetting of Section 230, and platforms that want to set algorithms and want to manipulate content, let them be responsible for the decisions they make. And those that want to be pure free speech platforms, let them be pure free speech platforms. But what happens when you're pure free speech platform? You're accused of enabling racism, and you're called all these all these dirty names for content that other people post, and you're saying that you're the one who is amplifying it. And the reality is, most of the content that people find horrendous really is not seen by a lot of people. Some of it is, some of it isn't. And if people want to see it because they think there's some value in seeing it, what third party really has a right to getting in between the creator and their audience, who voluntarily finds that content interesting for whatever reasons they find it interesting.
Yep, I agree with that. And the really alarming thing, Jeffrey, is that the EU, as well as UK and in Ofcom, they're not actually disguising their true objectives. Under the Ofcom guidelines that were published just last month, they even headed up that this is just the beginning, and they have a whole section showing that really what they want to do later this year is they want to introduce what they're calling crisis response protocols, which means that, and these are for emergency events. So they were citing the riots that took place in the UK last year, following the murder of 3 young girls by an Islamist person. They want to be able to control information which has got political content that they don't like, that they disagree with, and they are expecting platforms to comply with that state intervention. So that's what it's all about. It's all about crises. It's all about managing news, and they're putting in place the building blocks at the moment so that all platforms are able to do that across TV, radio, and now online content. So it's a real power grab, and it's not just a threat to free speech, it's the complete erosion of free speech in Europe.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately, it's not just Europe that's losing free speech. I think many people in the U.S. think that we have free speech here, but there's still a lot of penalties associated with being a free speech platform. And it just asks the experience of those that don't do content moderation in the way that that the establishment expects you to do content moderation. If you don't do that type of content moderation, if you look at what the consequences are, I don't know if you might not have ever heard of this platform, but before I was involved with BitChute, I was involved with Parler. I lived through, the destruction of a platform, based upon false allegations. My theory has always been with respect to Parler, and again, this is pure speculation, is that Parler was not really the target. I think maybe for some Parler was a target because it had become the most downloaded app in the world. More people, at the time Parler was destroyed, removed from the Google Play Store and the Apple Store, and Amazon stopped providing its infrastructure. It was more people were downloading Parler than were downloading Facebook, than were downloading TikTok, that were downloading all the other apps. It was number 1 in the App Store, in downloads, and got destroyed under allegations that it was represented a threat to national security, which was that was the claim that I think Apple made. I know Amazon made it, but I don't recall if Apple did it. I was told Apple did, but I don't recall. And that were false claims, and they had no evidence that these claims were true. But there were stories going around that Trump might join BitChute, and I think based upon a fear that they wanted to deprive Trump of a voice. That's my theory. Okay, it's just a theory, it's just speculation. But they wanted Trump shut down, so the logical place for Trump to go after having his Facebook account and YouTube account and Instagram account and Twitter account, shut down, the most obvious place for him to go, with the assumptions that they made was Parler. And so I think again, just speculation, that Trump was the target, and so Parler had to be sacrificed to make sure that Trump did not continue to have a voice after January 6th. So So it's the same type of logic. The logic is, there's an existential threat, and the government has to protect us from an existential threat, and shutting down certain people's voices, that can make a bad situation significantly worse. And so people can't think for themselves. People can't figure out what's truth and not truth. That people need a third party to mediate truth on their behalf. And that's basically every government, including the U.S., believes that. So I don't think, the U.S. doesn't yet have an Online Safety Act, but that doesn't mean that they're, find somebody, who has a big name and have them come onto BitChute and see what the consequences to them are for having, a BitChute account. So, there are many ways of doing it, either legally, or doing it more stealthily, but they still have the same, consequences. So, so this is a global problem, and I think people have to make decisions on whether they're more interested in being in the platforms that have the biggest audiences. It's not mutually exclusive. People could be on the platforms that are the biggest audiences and also support the platforms that are real free speech platforms. I can tell you that the people who are the ones most cited for free speech, people like this Mike Benz, Matt Taibbi in the U.S. I don't know if you know these names.
Yes,
but if you take a look at the people who this guy Schellenberger, I think, so these are people who claim that they don't like content moderation, they didn't like all these censorship, and these deplatforming and things like that. None of them have a BitChute account. None of them had a Parler account, and they all were silent when Parler got destroyed. So, and Parler was the only really truly legitimate free speech platform at the time, and I assert that the most legitimate of all the free speech platforms that are video streaming platforms is BitChute. So, if anyone reads, the content, the terms of service, in the type of content that's banned on other platforms versus what's banned on BitChute, then if you just read the terms of service, that's the best way of thinking what the guidelines are. It's clear that our guidelines promote more free speech than any other platform out there. So why
do you think, Jeffrey, that people like Michael Schellenberger, Mike Benz, they're obviously, position themselves as international champions of free speech and against censorship? Why wouldn't they have a BitChute account? I mean, that information really shocks and surprises me.
That's I'm bewildered by that also. I think one of the people, one of my colleagues, who still does some advisory work for BitChute, but she's been involved in BitChute and involved in Parler in similar capacity. She did for BitChute what she did for Parler, and she's still serving an advisory function for BitChute. Now, Amy Peikoff, she's involved in some of these groups on Twitter, and I think she's reached out to them, and none of them seem to be willing to provide an explanation. I question their sincerity. If they have sincerity, they would support. Again, they're not mutually exclusive. You could have a Facebook account, have an Instagram account, take all the selfies and videos you want, and put it up. Because of you're really impressed with yourself, so you want to put up all content to show how wonderful your life is. So all these expressions of personal vanity. Do all that crap. But if you're really for free speech, support the platforms that are the most committed to and who have paid the highest price for their integrity. So you would think that if someone has real integrity, they would support the platform that has the most integrity. So BitChute has issued a challenge that if anyone can find that anybody's been shadow banned, BitChute will pay $10,000, for which is a material amount for BitChute, because we don't have millions of dollars of revenue coming in, because for the most part, a lot of people don't want to put ads up on the platform. And we really would prefer not to have ads, would really prefer that, our people in our community would become subscribers. And therefore we would have, if everybody was a subscriber in BitChute, one of the benefits of being a subscriber is that there are no ads. So we would like a BitChute where everybody was a subscriber and there were no ads. But we're not going to moderate content to appease advertisers. So we just won't do that. Other people.
What we're doing, Jeffrey, which I think is important in the UK, because we still are, a liberal, what we call a liberal democracy here. We still have elected members of parliament, but unfortunately, many of them, like in the US, are just cannon fodder for the big vested interests, the big political parties and their financiers. But we are challenging this in the High Court. We have retained very prominent legal counsel here. We intend to take the UK government and the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, which is the department that Ofcom is part of. We're taking them to the High Court in London and challenging the whole lawfulness of the Online Safety Act itself. And we hope to get a judicial review and independent judges making a decision, hopefully in our favor.
What's the argument you're presenting? What's the legal case you're presenting on why this act is because speech is not constitutionally protected in the UK like it is in the US. So the UK doesn't have something comparable.
Well, I think we have more protections than the US. Remember, the American Constitution is ultimately based on the common law in the UK and on Magna Carta, which goes back to 1215. Where we instituted under common law the right of free speech, the right of an independent trial. So actually, we have lots more protections under English common law than Americans have just under the Second Amendment. So that's going to be the groundwork of our legal challenge. But at the moment, I've asked Ray at BitChute for sort of information on why the legal arguments as to why you disengaged, what your legal advice was in detail, not just the principle of free speech, because we want to be able to provide that information to the High Court, to the judge here, and show that actually free speech is being eroded because platforms are withdrawing from the UK market. So hopefully, with your help, we can actually construct. With your help a really coherent legal argument.
Well, I think for us, we never really engaged counsel to study in depth, what liability we had. I mean, so first, if you go through, like, you're asking a question to go through like our decision-making process, to be in compliance was something we never considered. Okay, so we were never gonna then we were never gonna be in compliance. Then the decision. Then we did a brief analysis of really, but never really detailed. We never got a formal legal opinion on really how enforceable a judgment would be against BitChute, because people they'd have to litigate with us in the U.S. because we're a U.S. entity. There are no assets, in the UK. So I don't even know what the value of getting a judgment would be, because I don't know how easy it would be to perfect that judgment. So we could have made one decision, is basically just say we're going to ignore the law. Well, I guess we could have gone three ways. One is we could have just said we're going to ignore the law and we'll deal with it when they come after us, and let them come after us in the U.S. And then we'll see how well they do in the U.S. Coming after us. The problem why I was reluctant to do that, even if I think that it was not likely to get a judgment, is we'd have to go to the U.S. court, and if we ever here's a trial, we'd have to acknowledge that we knew the law, we understood the law, and we decided to ignore it, which is not a good argument to make. So, or, we could have litigated, the act, but then what do you do while you're litigating the act? Do you continue to operate the platform? Do you not operate the platform? So I'm not an expert on UK law, so we've never studied it from a UK law perspective, and we never really studied much from the US law perspective either. So it's not, we never did any sort of detailed analysis because we knew we were not going to be in compliance. And given the fact that we were not willing to comply, we were not willing to collaborate, we were not willing to cooperate, we just had to, we just made a decision to, to exit. Now they claimed, what we initially did when we made a decision to exit is we let everybody who wanted to create content continue to post the content, and they could also interact with comments to their content, knowing those comments were not coming from any UK users. So if I put up, and for me, it was comparable to summing up, putting up a letter to the editor, or writing a column that appears in, in some magazine. So I put an article or editorial into the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times and Washington Post, and generally, if I put up that, I can read that, and I could read the comments that people put up, and I could submit my own comments to their comments, so I could see the comments on that. So Ofcom's argument is basically, even if people can content, you can see the comments to your content, even though those comments are coming from people outside the UK, but you're seeing how people are responding to the article you posted outside the UK, and people outside the UK are making comments, and you respond to some of those comments. They consider that also, something that has Ofcom jurisdiction. So now we've turned off comment. Now we've turned off the ability to comment, and that people can produce comment, but they can't see how that comment is, and how that content is engaged with other people. So people put up content, but they have no visibility on it. That's something we also implemented, and this is how absurd we are. But we've never given any consideration to cooperating, collaborating. We just won't do that, for principle. We think, again, we strongly think that the way to, your way through the courts is likely to take years, probably. If everyone did what BitChute did, we think they would get rid of the Online Safety Act pretty quickly if they realized, if everyone in the UK woke up one morning and had no Facebook, had no Twitter, had no YouTube, if every platform just shut out and said, UK, you're too oppressive regime, we just don't want to be in your country because we don't want to enable that type of oppression. We think that's the fastest route to getting the government to do the right thing. So people need to speak up. People need to assert themselves, and we think people should support platforms that stand on principle. And if more people stood on principle, then you would see the government would be more careful about, the government gets away with this really because people let the government get away with it.
Yeah.
I listened to a podcast the other day. I don't remember the name of the academic came up with this theory that basically they studied like how much, basically, if you get 3.5% of a population who can challenge a regime, and they challenge it in a constructive, consistent base. Challenge a regime doesn't mean you go out one day, but it means that every day you're out and you're protesting peacefully, the law, but you're making a statement that says you don't want to cooperate with the regime anymore. They say it basically said is that basically almost every regime will become vulnerable if enough people, and enough people is not a majority of the population. It just means to be some small percentage that care enough about to do something about it. And you can't care enough to do something about it by just maybe making a statement one day, and not one and done. It means if it's important to you, you gotta let people know. People are generally very good about letting others know what's important to them. and they're pretty assertive about things that are important to them. So it's basically people don't treat their inalienable rights as being important to them. So because they're not willing to do very much when they're being stripped from them. So I think if every platform does what BitChute has done, and if the UK people get out every day and just say it's like the movie Network, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Then basically you'll send you'll change government action, because ultimately what every politician wants is to be reelected. Once they've taken a step too far and they've threatened their own political livelihood, then they'll basically change their behavior. So the problem with the success of this is too many people don't believe in free speech. That's the problem. The government is getting away with this because free speech is not even they're very popular with the public. So this is the problem. The public is enabling this because they like to protect their speech, but they don't want to protect speech they don't like. So this is the problem: is that people don't want to protect speech that they don't like. So there are very few people who are really committed, to free speech. If more people were, no government would be behaving this way, in my opinion. So, but if there's something that we can do to help,
I think
we don't have a UK lawyer. We have nobody who's expert on the UK law because we have no need to have an expertise on the UK law because we have no presence in the UK. We have a platform that has a UK audience, but we don't have an entity in the UK anymore. Everything has been put into the US entity, So I don't know what we can do, how that would be helpful for what you're trying to do with your lawsuit, especially because we never really got a formal legal opinion. So we didn't study the legality very, very much. I think to we didn't want to take the risk of basically ignoring the law and going through litigation. So
the one action that we're aware of, and I'd be very interested in what your viewpoint is, and I don't know whether you think this is strong or not, but we were aware after Donald Trump became US president in January that the next month in February he issued a presidential memorandum. I don't know whether you've read that, but it was a memorandum defending American technology companies from overseas extortion and unfair fines and penalties. And we thought that might potentially be obviously a protection for American companies that would be fined or extorted with financial penalties by either Ofcom or by the EU under their EU Digital Services Act. So I don't know whether that's something that might lend you some protection.
Well, at the end of the day, if Ofcom would come after BitChute in the U.S. court, it would come after us in the U.S. court, then we decided to ignore Ofcom. We decided to basically say we understood, we know the law, we understood the law, and we decided to ignore the law, and we basically ignore the law because either the not established jurisdiction in the U.S. to come after us, and effect a judgment against us. But Trump cannot declare a UK law unconstitutional. So no third party can declare a law constitutional, and his memorandum is not necessarily, in my opinion, binding on every judge. So it's not a law. It's a statement of intent. So, but there's a difference between a statement of intent and the law. And as you've seen of many of the executive orders, many of these executive orders have been deemed to be, illegal or unconstitutional. They're nice statements of intent. They make nice objectives, but that doesn't mean they're consistent with what the Constitution allows a president to do. So without an act of Congress, without legislation. So, most things should be relied upon legislation, not executive fiat, replacing legislation because the legislature is dysfunctional and, it doesn't do anything. The Constitution doesn't say that if basically the legislature, renounces its authority, that therefore it's automatically delegated to the president. That's not in the Constitution. So many people would like,
President Trump has
many
also
people find that appealing, I think, but it's not in the Constitution.
President Trump and his administration has also had discussions, I understand, and that these follow the comments of Vice President J.D. Vance when he was in Munich, in Germany, at a conference, a security conference there, basically pitching free speech and censorship laws that European countries would pass, and that they could potentially the Americans would potentially retaliate with tariffs, or by making it potentially a condition of NATO membership that European countries don't pass censorship laws. They don't ban American technology companies and insist that
I don't know. I don't know if the U.S. has the right to pull out of NATO. I mean, maybe the U.S. can pull out of NATO for whatever reason it wants to pull out of NATO. The question is, I don't know. I don't know the NATO. I haven't read what the exit conditions are for the treaty. But I don't know if a condition of exit for the treaty would be, I don't like the fact that you have laws that require free speech, that I don't like the laws you're passing. So again, that's relying upon the actions of a third party. So I don't want to wait for what a third party will do. I don't have any control over Trump. Okay. So I have to run a business. So while I'm running a business, I can't think about somebody who has no involvement in my business on what they might or might not do and what they're likely to get accomplished or not likely to get accomplished. When people negotiate, people start out with extreme positions, and then, as you saw, just recently with, the deal with the Chinese, well, whether it's a deal or not deal, it seems to be a ceasefire. It's not really a deal yet. It's a ceasefire, in the trade war, as opposed to a real deal. But you see, that these punitive tariffs on both sides are coming down because, it's mutually assured destruction. So they each got to a point where they said, this is mutually assured destruction, and we can't continue this way, and so, maybe they'll get a deal done, maybe they won't, but things, there'll be compromises made along the way, and ultimately, what's more valuable, if there's a good deal that Trump thinks for economics, okay, then this could be a point that he negotiates away because he's going to get some other value for it. So Trump's a pretty smart negotiator. So you throw a lot of crap out there, a lot of conditions, and then you figure out which are the ones you're willing to concede on, and say, okay, I'm making this concession. Now you got to make a reciprocal concession to me. So I think this is something that they would trade away for something that had economic value. So I would not bet that the UK is going to abolish the Online Safety Act in order to get a trade deal, with Trump. So I don't think that would be a good reason to not do a smart economic deal. So and for a guy who's all about who's transactional, he's transactional, wanting to do good economic deals. So if he has a good economic deal, why would he decide to not do a good economic deal just to make a philosophical statement about free speech in the UK? So maybe UK maybe they'll agree to not fine the US company so much money or something like that, so they could find some other compromise, but the law will still exist, and maybe it'll exist in a way that'll be beneficial to YouTube and Twitter, and the large platforms, and maybe only beneficial to them. So we think people have to take responsibility for their own decisions. We're taking responsibility. We think the way to fight the Online Safety Act is to get out of the country. that people should do what we did. Have all their UK content creators, continue to put up, and who knows, maybe more people will go out in the UK and take responsibility by getting, VPNs and and asserting, and then basically, shielding their identity, their location, having and privacy, and therefore not only would they have unrestricted access to the internet, they won't have people, profiting off of data mining them as well. So people have to fight for their rights, unfortunately. Government is supposed to protect our rights, but if you don't fight for them, the government's not going to put effort into protecting it, because there's no incentive for the government to protect the rights. The more rights they take away, the more powerful government becomes. So you have to produce a counterweight. So again, litigation will take years to get done. And in the interim, what happens while you're litigating? So so that's why again, I'll repeat, I think we made the right decision. I think everybody should do what BitChute did. It's just tell the UK, you've done the OS, we're not complying. We're not living up to the Online Safety Act. We're getting out, and let the public know your decision has basically discouraged all platforms from operating in your country. That's you own that decision. So I bet you if everybody did that, the online safety, they'd be meeting in Parliament redoing the Online Safety Act. Problem is
the reality, as you know, Jeffrey, is that what we call the tech bros, the Mark Zuckerbergs and Elon Musks of this world, despite I don't believe they're sincere about free speech, because we saw how Facebook and how Google sort of complied with censorship during the Biden administration, during the US presidential elections. They took a side there, so they will comply with censorship. I think the tipping point is going to come with populations just simply not willing to tolerate their erosion of democratic rights, of free speech.
Well,
already in Europe.
Well, what I suggest is the people like the Schellenbergs and the Taibis and Mike Benzes and JD Vance. Okay, I suggest they all get BitChute accounts. Okay, I suggest that they don't participate in platforms that enable the UK. Okay, they're enabling the law by using platforms that are cooperating with the law.
Yes,
and they're not supporting the platforms that are standing up for the principles that they go out and speak about. So they can go up, it's very nice, they can go to Europe and make these nice talks, but you got to walk the walk. Walk the walk.
Yeah.
Okay. Walking the walk means having a BitChute account. Okay. It means supporting all the platforms that are really going to stand up for free speech. So how can you say I'm supporting free speech and not support any platform that has the greatest level of integrity with respect to free speech and has paid the highest price associated with making that decision to support free speech? So my suggestion is JD Vance, come on to BitChute. Okay, Schellenberg, come on to BitChute. Matt Taibbi, come on to BitChute. Benz, come on to BitChute. Okay, don't if you want to keep all your other accounts, keep all your other accounts, but show you walk the walk. Okay, be on the platforms that have paid more price than anyone for being the most sincere, having the most integrity with respect to the preservation of free speech and privacy.
Yeah, it's a fair point. It's a good point. I agree with you.
So I think we're coming to, this is a enjoyable conversation. I wish there's more we could do to help, but you're in a different legal jurisdiction than us, so I don't know what advice we could give you regarding a UK lawsuit. I'd be very interested from an intellectual point of view of knowing the basis of your lawsuit and understanding the filing, and because I'd like to see you have success in your lawsuit, and I think it's great work that you're doing for your country, your people of the UK, by keeping them informed of that you have a very oppressive regime, and you're looking to hold them accountable, and I respect the work you're doing to hold them accountable. You're walking the walk, so I have a lot of respect for the people who actually, walk the walk. On these conversations, I always like to give my guest, the last word. So, I talked a lot, so maybe I didn't give you an opportunity of getting across things that you wanted to be able to express to the audience here. So why don't you, now you have whatever time you want to take to say whatever you feel you want to say that I didn't give you an opportunity to say, but
I really value the time that we've spent together. It's been very insightful to understand what BitChute's real sort of philosophical, sort of principled motivations were in not complying with the censorship, not complying with government sort of fiat on your business, and I respect that. I feel there is a tipping point coming. I think that institutions of government in the UK have suffered huge reversals. I mean, the first one was 2016 with Brexit, and I can see today that in basically weaponizing legislation like the Online Safety Act, it's actually having the reverse effect. People are actually starting to rebel. They're starting to have very little confidence, even in our police force at the moment. Our police are actually knocking on people's doors, arresting them for tweets and for posts that they've made on social media. And people across the country are realizing that these are inconsistent with free speech, and people are beginning to resist and to revolt against it. So I'm confident that whether we win in the High Court, in judicial matters is one thing, but I think we all have to push back, and that's what we are doing, and I'm hopeful that eventually we'll gain some positive results.
Well, I wish you great success in what you're doing. I think it's very, very important work.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
And